Now, it's a lovely, leisurely Sunday morning. Time to relax with maybe a croissant, a coffee, and some conflict. Yes, because we do like to have some robust debate here on Talk Radio, as you have been hearing. And, joining me for Cristo's conflict this morning, on the left, Mike Buckley, journalist and campaigner. On the right, Connor Tomlinson, political commentator. Morning to you both. I'll start with, why do we need lateral flow testing for people who don't have any symptoms? I understand it for the vulnerable. I understand for people who are in certain environments, care homes, health situations. I understand it for people who have particular symptoms. But surely this absolutely crazy amount of mass testing for people who have a little bit of a cold, a little bit of a sniffle, and a little bit of a cough is getting out of hand. Mike Buckley, what say you?
Well, I mean, let's just look at the big picture here. The big picture is that yesterday, even the government, their figures admitted that we hit 150,000 deaths in the UK. The ONS, Office for National Statistics, puts that at about 175,000. We are the 7th country in the world to hit 150,000. And if the ONS is right, then it's far worse. We're quite a small country. Out of 200 countries, we should not be the 7th in the world to hit 150,000 deaths. We're clearly doing a terrible, terrible job of managing this pandemic on its key statistic, which is people dying. Of course, it's even worse when you look at people who've been in hospital, come out and they're still sick, long COVID, case numbers. We're doing a terrible job. One of the things that we can do to keep the track on things is to test, to work out who's got this virus so that they can self-isolate and not give it to other people. Ending mass testing has nothing to do with keeping the public safe. It has everything to do with Rishi Sunak and this government wanting to save a bit of money. But the cost of that will be public health, will be even more people becoming sick, being hospitalised and dying in the future. We're very lucky with this variant, Omicron, that it's a bit milder than previous variants. But there's no guarantee that the next variant is going to be as mild as this one or milder still. It could be more.
All right, Connor. I mean, we hit that grim milestone of 150,000 deaths or more yesterday. By getting rid of testing, we are getting rid of perhaps as many people self-isolating with this variant, and therefore it's grossly irresponsible. What do you say?
I'd like to say that Mike's reading of the idea that the next strain might be more virulent than Omicron is scientifically illiterate. I mean, if our viruses mutate, they want to kill their host less so they can incubate inside more human bodies. So it's more likely actually that this is the way out of the pandemic in quite a natural way. It's strange to me that anyone would be defending mass testing who claims to be an environmentalist, considering the amount of plastic pollution in the ocean, and also the country that we pay to produce the tests is China, so we're financially rewarding them for unleashing them on the country. It's no argument from a lot of people who are continually in favour of mass testing to say, oh, let's re-import the manufacturing over to the UK. I'm sure Mike would agree with me that would be a good idea if we're going to continue the testing. Now, I'm all in favour of scrapping the testing in total, mainly because they're not effective, and again, there's a lot of plastic pollution. The only problem is, and I'm going to bring up something that Portia said earlier in the show that I converged with her on, and that is that the problem with vaccine passports are still in place. So people who either cannot or do not need to be vaccinated will now have to pay on top of what they've already paid for mass testing, because they haven't been free, they've been taxpayer subsidized by the NHS. They're going to have to pay for every single time they want to go to a nightclub or a sporting event about 30 quid a pop. And I don't know about you lads, when I was a student, I was paying less than that on shopping a week.
Well, the argument against that would be get vaccinated, it's free.
But that doesn't stop you from transmission. So the vaccine passports are entirely pointless because it doesn't.
I know that, but the argument. But if you're making a point, as you probably know, I'm also absolutely against vaccine passports. I don't believe that they encourage the people who don't want the vaccines to have them. But if you take your specific point about cost, the argument would be, well, the vaccines are free. The vaccines are free, so why would you then?
They're not free. They're also taxpayer subsidised.
Well, they're taxpayer subsidised, but you don't have to then fork out personally, other than in your taxes. I take that point, to do a lateral flow test if you just go down to your local vaccination centre and get a vaccine. Why wouldn't you do that?
Well, actually, so I'm in quite an interesting position here of where I can't have any of the boosters ever, or the Pfizer or Moderna jab, because I have quite severe anaphylaxis. And I'm actually pursuing a vaccine exemption medical. But I was told when I rang NHS 119 that if your GP rejects it, and obviously there's like conflict of interest in there for GPs rejecting some things that might be a bit flimsy or negotiable because they get paid per booster, so they want everyone to take it. If they reject it once, there's no appeals process and you can't ever reappeal.
So why are you claiming an exemption from a booster? Do you mind me asking?
I've got anaphylaxis, so literally the mRNA vaccines, I can't actually take them because they might be lethal.
All right, so Mike, there are going to be people who are in Connor's position that won't be able to use the vaccine passport, that might need to have their. I mean, that's an argument to keep the lateral flow testing, isn't it? You're making there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, of course it is. And people in Connor's position, they either need special vaccines made available to them that they are able to take, or they need some kind of exemption. And I'm sorry that there are people in Connor's position. I will just come back on something else that Connor said, and this is said by so many people. And I really hope that Connor's right. I really hope that this virus does continue to mutate in a way that makes it less severe. But there is no guarantee of that. There is no other virus that we know of that becomes less severe over time. Flu has become no less severe over the course of our lifetimes, nor has the common cold, nor has HIV, nor has Ebola. Smallpox didn't become any less severe before we eradicated it. Polio hasn't become any more severe. It would be really nice if it were true, but it isn't true. The virus is going to mutate again. It is just as likely to become more severe as it is likely to become less severe or stay the same.
I mean, mutating viruses, doesn't science say that they tend to get milder if they are mutating? I mean,
no, it doesn't. That's just a story that we've been told for weeks on end by the same people.
Hang on a minute, Mike. The common cold was a SARS virus. So it's the exact same species of virus as the coronavirus, and it's mutated down to the common cold. Now Omicron is sharing the same symptoms. To say that it won't get milder is scientifically illiterate. No,
I would genuinely encourage you to check this out, because I realise this is a story that has been told to us many times.
Well, okay,
there's no scientific basis for it at all.
Let's say you're completely correct, Mike, for the sake of argument. None of us are scientists, but let's say you are for the sake of argument. That still doesn't mean that this strain isn't more mild. I mean, it is. So many of the places that are reporting on this now are saying that there are so many studies saying that Omicron is massively less mild, so massively more mild, rather. So this is a great thing. Many people are saying, look, let's just get Omicron so we get the antibodies that we require. What's wrong with that, Mike?
It is less severe, but it is still putting people in hospital. It's still killing people. And there are other things about it which are extremely concerning. I mean, in the last 3 weeks, more children have been hospitalised than were hospitalised in the whole of the first wave. This variant may be
with or for COVID, Mike. With or for COVID. Sorry, you've got to clarify that.
It's worse for children.
Mike, there are a lot of studies saying that this is children who are going in, as Connor just alluded to, for something else, and they are being tested with Omicron and therefore being added to the figures. That does not necessarily mean that children are being hospitalised for Omicron. I think we need to be really careful about that.
My understanding is that it's for Omicron, and this has been borne out in the US and many other countries as well. But I will check that out, and obviously I would encourage any of your listeners who are concerned about that to check it out as well, because I haven't done that checking out yet. But we can't be complacent about this. Just because this is slightly less severe than Delta or Alpha does not mean that it isn't putting people in hospital and killing them, because it is. And therefore, any of us need to be concerned about that. And the other point, I mean, you say, well, let's get Omicron and let's become immune to it. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be immune to the next variant. The number one point about Omicron is that it evades existing immunity. The spike proteins have changed enough that it evades the immunity we had from vaccines or from prior infection. So the next variant may evade the immunity you get from Omicron. You may needlessly get ill from this one, and then you'll just get ill with the next one or the one after that, because that may also evade immunity. It would be great if we were at the end of this pandemic, but we're not. At least not as far as I'm aware.
But if everything evades immunity, Mike, then what is your solution for pandemic policy? Because I assume you agree with Plan B vaccine passports, but if it evades immunity of the vaccines, then what's the point of checking that? And then if it's going to evade any other sign of immunity, then okay, what's the use of the test? Why do we need to keep testing? If it's going to be around forever, then shouldn't we just get
because it harms people. We want to stop people getting it. So therefore we have
You're never going to stop people getting a respiratory virus.
I'm sorry?
You're never going to. It's never going to be zero COVID, Mike. It's got animal reservoirs. It's always going to mutate. You are always going to have this. Whether or not it mutates to be stronger or weaker is completely different.
Look, just to say to you both, hang on,
and minimise the likelihood of variants. Sorry, Cristo.
Hang fire. Right, I can find an equal number of articles online saying, look, viruses evolve to get worse, and Omicron will evolve. The coronavirus will evolve to get worse, as I can find to say, look, it's going to evolve to be milder. That's the first point. But just to and so I think it comes down to whether your glass is half empty or half full on COVID, really. But Mike, just to pick up on Connor's point there regarding the COVID policy that we have long term. Okay, let's take again your scenario. Maybe we have a variant that's slightly worse that comes along. Are we going to keep going into this perpetual cycle of lockdowns, of restrictions, of Plan B, of passports? At some point, we can't be having this conversation in 6 months, a year, 2 years. I mean, there's got to be some other long-term way out of this, hasn't there, Mike?
No, absolutely. We all want a long-term way out of it. I mean, and the good news is there is one. If we vaccinate the whole world, that massively reduces the likelihood of another variant, because the virus has less opportunities to replicate and therefore less opportunities for a new variant to appear. And it also
you just say, sorry, that they evaded the spike protein?
Sorry?
So didn't you just say evaded the spike protein? And then if you look at the ONS data, there are more cases, more hospitalizations and more deaths among people that are vaccinated. Now, that's because most people are vaccinated, of course, but the vaccines aren't foolproof. So I don't understand how your plan to vaccinate the entire world is going to eliminate COVID.
Because it won't eliminate it, but it will minimize the opportunity for a new variant to develop, because a variant develops when somebody has it, particularly if they have it for a long time, for example, if they're immunosuppressed, and it then spreads in that population. If that population is significantly immune because of vaccinations or because of prior infection,
there is also
it has less opportunity to spread.
But we spoke to a doctor this morning that also said, and if you saw the video online of the doctor that challenged Sajid Javid, their point, and we saw this as well with the 26% vaccination rate in South Africa, but them facing facing Omicron in a far better way than we did, that was all put down to the fact that there was natural immunity. The doctor that challenged Sajid Javid said it was natural immunity that was always going to be better than a vaccination. So if natural immunity gives you a better way of fighting COVID than vaccinations, and as Connor alluded to, the ONS data is showing that the Omicron is more prevalent among the vaccinated. It may be milder as a result of the vaccine, but it is more prevalent. Vaccines might not be the way out of all of this, Mike.
Well, that doctor was simply wrong. I mean, I'm not medical or a scientist, but I've done a lot of reading on this.
So why are you telling the doctors wrong?
Because vaccination is better than prior infection, particularly with Omicron.
Isn't that just a story they've all told you, Mike?
I was reading about this week. Prior infection
let him finish, Connor. Let him finish.
Okay, fair enough. Sorry.
Prior infection, I was reading about it this week, gives you 19%. I can't remember which study this was. I think it was the Imperial College one. So 19% protection against Omicron. So if you've had Delta, Alpha, or the Wuhan variant before, you're very unlikely to be protected by a prior infection. If you've had 3 jabs, including a booster jab, at the moment, you're about 88% protected from an Omicron infection, which is great, really, really great news. That does go down fairly swiftly. Within about 10 weeks, that goes down
Mike,
to about...
I have spoken to a doctor
vaccination is better.
I've spoken to a doctor this morning who has told me that a retired NHS surgeon who said that vaccination is better. But also, I've spoken to very, very pro-vaccine doctors on this programme, the doctors who are far less keen, probably on your side of the debate, far less keen to sort of open up quickly, far more cautious, who have told me, whom I spoke to practically every day over Christmas, that the reason that South Africa had a milder version and why we needed to be more cautious here was their lack of vaccination against Omicron and the natural immunity that they'd built up by having COVID and recovering. And so what you are saying, you may have doctors agreeing with what you're saying, but there is a large number of doctors, even on your side of the debate, that disagree with what you say, Mike.
There are differences of opinion. My understanding with South Africa is it's got a far younger population than we do. Their median age population is 29, ours is 40. That's going to make a difference. they just had a very big Delta wave, so they had lots of recent immunity. Some of them, I don't know how many of them, but a good proportion of them are vaccinated. I think they got one of the highest vaccination rates.
Yeah, they've only got 26% vaccination rate.
Okay, 26% vaccination rate. Also, they had a beta wave and a gamma wave, which we didn't in the UK. And my understanding is that the mutations in beta and gamma are more similar to Omicron than Delta and Alpha and the Wuhan
So aren't you
variant.
saying with all this, the natural immunity is better? Then?
Connor, this is going to be the last word on this because we've got to go. But why don't you just respond to Mike's points before we go?
Well, I think, thank you, Cristo. I think Mike's defeating his own argument here because he's admitting that South Africa has a lower vaccination rate, but then it's had multiple waves of COVID, therefore it has a high rate of natural immunity. So I don't understand Mike's argument for vaccinating the entire world again, which is at cost because nothing is free, it's always taxpayer subsidized, and the companies that are making the vaccines, Pfizer has the largest medical lawsuit in human history, so they might be a bit spurious about giving your money to them, rather than just having what the earlier doctor said about essentially a chickenpox party for Omicron. Everyone gets it mildly and you get natural immunity. Problem solved.